Okay, Vibeke, thank you for agreeing to participate in the interview. It is part of INO's work on a special issue of the International Journal of Disability and Social Justice, intended to mark the 50 years of independent living in 2022. The topic of the interview and the special issue is independent living in Europe and beyond, past, present, and future. So let us start with some questions about the past and the lessons learned from the 50 years of independent living advocacy. Can you tell me, how did you first learn about independent living and what has been the impact on your life?
Mm. Well, the first time I learned about the independent living philosophy, that was through my friend and colleague Bente Skansgård. She's a pretty known person in the movement. And when I talked to her, I kind of was inspired by the way she was thinking and, describing how my life could be. I had been in an accident and I was in need of personal assistant, and she has heard about this model within the independent living movement. She had been to the States, learned from Judy Human, and she had a lot of experience talking to Adolf Ratzka. So that was also my, starting my learning process with independent living philosophy. And then together with Bente and some other persons, we actually started Juluba in Norway in 1991. And Juluba is one of the independent living movements organizations, and actually by this date, the only one in Norway. So we learned a lot from the US, but mostly we had a dialogue with Adolf Ratzka and STIL, Stockholm Independent Living Cooperative. And we went to Stockholm, we went to Sweden many times. Adolf visited us. We talked to GIL as well, Göteborg Independent Living. And that was it all, how it all started when we started to build Juluba, and my meeting, so to say, with the philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now thinking about independent living advocacy, what were your biggest achievements and the biggest challenges or failures throughout the years?
I think that, well, one of the most important thing I have been, contributed to, that was the establishing of Juluba as the independent living cooperative in Norway. And I am one of the 5 founders of Juluba, together with Bente, as I said. And I think Juluba as an organization has had a lot of impact on the disability and for disabled people, and their fight for equality. So that has been very important. And obviously, through Juluba's history, we have been doing lots of things. We have had actions, we have written law proposals. We have been lobbying with the politicians. We have grown as a very solid independent living organization. And maybe also one of the thing that I am quite proud to have achieved, that was we also opened the personal assistance scheme for people who cannot lead their own personal assistant and children. So that was important to sort of include every disabled persons within the scheme, of those who has from those who want to have personal assistance. But looking back, we could have done also a lot of things differently. chosen different strategies, maybe also have a lot more focus on building peer support between disabled people themselves, encouraged people to go into politics, because it's obviously it's there the decision is taken. So well, many things we could have been done differently, of course, but I think we have achieved a lot anyway.
And in terms of challenges that you have faced, one you kind of touched upon a few, like the probably insufficient peer support and insufficient participation of disabled people in politics. What has been a big challenge or barrier?
I think there has been two major barriers as I see it. The first barrier, who is I think quite the same all over the world, that's the the way people still see and think of disabled persons. We are still seen as weak and people with no resources. We are seen as sick people who need treatment, and we are seen as people who the professionals, they are the expert. We are not experts on ourselves. Many people amongst us are seen as people who are not incapable to take responsibility in our own life. I mean, this way of looking at disabled people, it is a huge barrier for us to be equal to other citizens in Norway. And I also think that's the same situation in Europe and the world. And also in Norway, I do think, we have this welfare system. The government, the state, they provide a lot of services for people who are in need of services, and disabled people also, have services, kind of like home care helper, institutions, other kinds of services that you need. And some of these services are, they are good and they are adequate, and they are, the right type of services to be equal and to participate. But very many of these services, they do the opposite. They keep you as a passive individual that cannot leave your home, or they place you in an institution, and they sort of keep you down, but they still keep you in life, so to say, so that people don't react on these services as they should. I think disabled people should be more motivated to make changes. I think disabled people should react more to all these kind of services who, don't as is a tools for equality, but just tools to stay in a passive, inefficient role. These are two of the large barriers. And I also think another thing is that we have more than 150 different kinds of organizations in Norway, but most of them are organizations, based on a diagnosis. So disabled people seem to see themselves also as a diagnosis more than, a citizen with rights and duties. And that's a huge problem.
That's a very important point. Yeah. Often remains unrecognized. And how do you assess the role of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in terms of advocacy potential?
I think the convention is very important. Norway has at this point ratified the convention, but we have not incorporated it yet, actually. And that is one of the large things, this big cases that we are working on in Norway at this time, to get the convention incorporated. Because I think if we can use the convention as a tool for equality and really use it, I think it's worth a lot. But you know, if we don't use it, and it's just, you know, something that the government signed on and ratified, and it will have no impact at all. So, but if we get the convention incorporated, I think and hope that it will lead to that people in the bureaucracy, the administration, in municipalities or on government level, they will also get more education and get to know the convention much better if it is ratified, because you then need to sort of look into it, and you can't, you know, you can't ignore it. Actually, at this point, municipality seems to say that, oh no, the convention, that's something the government signed on, so it doesn't affect us as the municipalities. So that is one, you know, way of seeing it, and it's it doesn't help us.
No, yeah. And how could this process happen, moving from signing to incorporating? Is this do you see a big role mostly for disability organizations in pushing for this? Or?
Yes, I think we have a responsibility to pushing it forward, to you know, let the politicians know that this is important. And I think we have to do that. And we have already had a campaign with many thousands signatures saying that it must be incorporated. We also have had meeting with the politicians. We know that many of the political parties in Norway at the time have, you know, an intention to incorporate the convention. So in these days we are waiting and having meetings with the government so that they will prioritize this. But it has been a shift in the government in Norway the last year, and we know that there are many cases they are working on, and they are sort of a bit behind on many cases as well. So now we need to, you know, start asking much more on what are the concrete plans. When do we get the convention incorporated? I actually think we will manage to get it incorporated, but the question is when.
Yeah. We started touching a bit about the present. I just have a couple of other questions about the past before continuing with the present. In your advocacy for independent living, who have been your main allies so far? And who is afraid of independent living?
Yes. Our major, actually, we have had a lot of politicians, you know, one-on-one individual, not a party, political party, but individual politicians. You know, they have seen the intention that we have. They have seen the importance of the way we think and the way the independent living philosophy. You know, it's quite a logic, and it should be a natural way of thinking. So we do have had single persons amongst the politicians who have been very positive. And also, of course, colleagues in Yuluba has been, you know, working and being positive on this. And actually, we have had how do you say, the authorities who work for equality, they have been quite positive. But we don't have had any sorry. We have had a lot of enemies. We have had more enemies than allies, because this has been a strange way of thinking for many people. They have thought that this will, change the one who is in control. The municipalities and the health professions have been, against this way of thinking. They don't have had the trust. They obviously does not want us to have the power in this. And people think it costs a lot more than the society will gain on this as well. Yes, so there has been a lot of enemies and a lot of skeptics, and we had to show people that this is actually working with the personal assistance scheme. So that is mainly what Juluba has done as well. We just started, and we have shown people that this is a good solution, and this is working.
It's amazing the things you have achieved given this opposition and all these challenges, really. A question that is very interesting for me, has advocacy changed over the years since the activism started?
Well, you can say that we have done a lot of the same things. We have been lobbying towards politicians. We have been sharing experience and telling about personal assistance to other disabled people. We have been showing examples that this works. We have been talking to the union. We have talking to all kinds of employee organizations. We have been talking to, well, I don't know who we don't have talked to. So I think we do many of the same things, but I think we are more thorough, finding the target group and more specific in our strategy, our way of working. We have tried to prioritize down, not to try to achieve as much as possible, but achieve one step at a time. But I do think that disabled people themselves has been finally been starting to see themselves as discriminated against, because they have many people have tended to just think that, I have a diagnosis, I am disabled, I need to adjust the society, and if I can't participate in that, well, I can't do then. So I think in the way of thinking amongst disabled people themselves has changed a lot. And I do think that we have more people in Norway today who see disabled people as discriminated against, not only as sick people who needs, care and treatment. So something has changed, even though we also take steps going back and backwards, in the sense of, for instance, the municipalities are rebuilding a lot of institutions these days. They are smaller than the old ones, but they are still institutions.
Okay, this brings us again to the present, and what are the main tasks of independent living advocacy at present?
Well, the main task is, for us in Juluba, we do have, 3-4 tasks. We want to have personal assistant, the personal assistance scheme. We want to have it taken out from the health legislation. We want a separate law on personal assistance, so we are working for that. We also want to incorporate, as I said, the convention. And we also want to, and we are working for through a project that we have, decision making, support to decision making. Today we have a system in Norway that if you need help in taking decisions, or you have a guardian, that's the common model, but we are trying to go from there to get a law on decision making support, and Ylva also has a project going on there. So that is the three main thing, and we also, of course, always has this focus on deinstitutionalization, which is, part of the independent living philosophy. Sorry.
Have any current issues had an impact, and what impact have they had on the independent living advocacy in Norway? By current issues, I refer to COVID or the war in Ukraine or Euroscepticism or any other relevant to Norway issues.
Well, I think that the situation of the pandemic, the COVID, it has led to that people have stayed home in much more sense. We have not been able to meet the politicians, physical meeting. We have not been around having seminars and coursing that much, but because of the digital, developing and everything, we are using Teams as a tool, and we have actually been quite active on Teams. So I think that, I think we have actually managed to do a lot of the things that we had planned to, even though the pandemic situation. I think actually people who are not disabled in Norway has had an eye-opener, and have had a little taste on the life we live as disabled people, not able to get out, so if you don't have personal assistance and things like this, many activities we can't attend and everything. So the public in general has had a taste of that. And I know, the Ukrainian situation and the war in Ukraine, I wouldn't say that it has had an indirect, consequence for disabled people in Norway. We have, actually been sitting back a bit helpless because we wanted to find ways to help disabled people in Ukraine, but that hasn't been so easy. Because we are not, we have not had the opportunity to go into Ukraine, and to get people to Norway has been difficult. And when they come to Norway, of course, we need to organize and to welcome people. We have to organize assistance and the housing and everything. So that has been a challenge. And we don't have, it's a quite low number of disabled people who has come from Ukraine to Norway. But if we are asked by the government and everything, we are absolutely willing to, do what we can do to help.
Okay. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about the convention that there are other priorities at the moment, seem to have other priorities for the government, and this is not the implementation of the convention is not one of them. What are the other types of priority? What kind of things are preoccupying?
Oh, it's, the price of groceries, food has risen. The price, not least on power, electricity has raised. And we have all these, these larger, for some people, more important issues than the convention. So the convention has, been set in the back for a while. So yeah, and we do also have the law on guardianship. The government has seen this law as a challenge because it doesn't, it is sort of in conflict with the convention. So it's not an easy way for the government to see how to incorporate. Yeah, so it needs working.
Okay. Let me see. What are the current barriers to independent living in your country? We did touch about this. If there is anything you would like to add.
No, it's again, I think it's still a picture, of disabled people as sick people. We are not recognized as discriminated against. For some, at some politicians and some people, of course we are, but in where they take decision makers, they don't see it quite that way yet. And for instance, the personal assistance scheme, their government are working on that just now. And we are hoping it will be taken out from the healthcare legislation, and also from the the health department. And we mean and we hope that it will be the Department of Social and Work or Equality, who will be responsible for the new personal assistance scheme. We will see. There is also a debate on which personal assistance should be within the municipality or governed within the state. So that's a huge question as well. Yeah, and also the government, but the last government, not the government who are ruling now, but the last government, they set down a committee with 13 people who should look into the personal assistance scheme and suggest what we need to do to get it better and to get it more like a quality tool of equality. And I was one of the persons in that committee, and in total we were 4 people, representing disabled people, but we did not agree on the suggestions to the government. And there was not even a majority. So it's a huge debate at the time. So we will see what the government will do with this now. So we'll wait.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether this could be seen as an attempt to, like what's happening in Sweden, to limit the personal assistant.
You can say that our suggestions and will not lead to that it should be less personal assistance for people. Quite the opposite, actually. But it's quite up to the government at this time. They're sitting, there has been 172, I think, persons and organizations and companies who has written to the government on this hearing and said what they mean. And the government are going through all these 172 documents now, and they will see this also together with the report that we from the committee delivered, and then they need to find some way of some solution, if it's a concrete solution or if it's still within the healthcare legislation, or it will be taken out from the healthcare legislation. Will there be a question of another committee who should look into how this could work within the state, taken out from the municipalities? Well, we don't know. It's quite open what they will do at the time, but they are sitting and working with it, and we will know something late autumn maybe, or spring next year.
Okay, so there is still some time.
Yeah.
Okay, and now moving towards the future, what is the future of independent living in Europe and beyond? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to, I think we must see that we have many of the same priorities in the futures that we are working on now. I think the thing will take time. We will not stop before we get a personal assistance scheme within the government. That's important for us. If it should be a real tool for equality, we think that it needs to be within the government, the state. So that is something we will keep fighting for, and we will keep fighting for incorporation on the convention. So if that doesn't happen soon, we will still have a focus on that in the future. And obviously we will have a focus also on the law on supported decision making. That's a quite principal question within the convention as well, and making people see that to be disabled has nothing to do with the way you look or walk or talk or whatever the way you live your day. It has to do with all the barriers and the attitudes from society around, and to keep learning people, keep telling and keep showing that this is the case is quite important for us. So, and that is actually seeing disabled from the medical way, medical model, or seeing people and discrimination from the social way, the barriers that actually creates disabled persons.
And in terms of strategies, what strategies do you think independent living activists in Europe in general should adopt?
I think it's important to, get involved. I think we need to. I do think we should be quite strong together. But seeing what is needed is will be different kinds of way to see this. So I think that the philosophy, the ideology within the independent living movement, it's a strong philosophy. And I think that awareness about this philosophy is quite important, so that disabled people themselves actually manage to see themselves as discriminated against. We tend to we tend to reflect in what other people expect from us, and that is always and a lot of time less than people expect from other non-disabled people. So I think we have a huge way to go within the movement, with awareness, learning from each other, and stay together. And I think it's important that we make very clear strategy, a clear goal. What do we want? Can we achieve? And trying to find what is the similar, challenges in the different kinds of countries. So what can we be working together to? And I think we have a huge work to do within personal assistance schemes to make them good in every country. To get disabled people in ordinary work. As a part of the workforce. That's important, and we need tools, as for instance personal assistance on that. And of course personal assistance is important tools to turn down the institutions around people are still living in. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And what is the role of the younger generation of independent living activists?
Well, I don't know if the young people actually know that their role will be that important, but it is a really important And that is also our responsibility as the older generation to, you know, to share our experiences and learn the younger, you know, people who are coming on the philosophy, the ideology, because I think the young people has to be the ones who are, you know, you need to keep fighting for the rights, and the rights we actually have, you know, achieved. The young people need to guard them. They need to, you know, be some kind of a watch and react, because that rights, they will be taken away if you don't, you know, watch them and guard them. And that is the younger generation's task and role as well. So it's quite a responsibility to you know, grow up as a young disabled person today as well. But I think it's important. I think it's important to get involved, to get active, and I hope many young people will go into politics, because I'm, you know, it's there. The decision making is, and if you want some power in that, you need to be an active yourself. So education and well, education and involving and getting into politics, it's important. Yeah, absolutely.
And in the follow-up to this, what organizations of disabled people or the pioneers, the activists that's been in the field for a long time can do to involve more young people and to make them more active? I've heard a lot of concerns about the lack of engagement of younger generation. What can be done to overcome this?
Well, I think that young people also need to, you know, create networking and going together. I think we need, or they need to interact. We need to interact with each other. We need to tell. They need to listen. They need to tell us. We need to listen. I mean, I think it's learning from each other and finding, you know, sharing what is important and what is not important. What will lead to the right direction. We need to talk about that. We need to share experience. We need to show each other that things are possible. I think it's a huge important that a young person has a role model. You know, you can show you that things are possible and worth working for. So I think those things are important. I think it starts with ourselves as disabled people, and also we have to start to see ourselves as, you know, people with the same value as everyone else. We need to climb our rights and our rights, and I, you know, go on the barricades, write articles, talk together, be strong together. All these things, it's important, and it takes time, and it won't stop. I think not. So it's and every person counts. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. It sounds like good final words, but if you want to say anything else before we stop the recording, is there anything I forgot to ask you about, or you would like to highlight one more time?
Well, no, I think I've said a lot. My English is not my mother tongue, as you hear, so it's quite. So I hope that it has been understandable. But I think the most important for me to say that as last word is actually what I said, that people need to take responsible. People need to get involved. People need to, you know, fight their own case, their own cause. Rights are not never given to anyone. You need to fight for them, and I think it's important never to forget that. never to sit back, even that feels comfortable. I do think we all have a responsibility, and I think also we have a responsibility for all those people who cannot be in the fight, you know, people who does not have the opportunity, people in institutions who has no chance of getting out if we don't, you know, help to open the society. So, and I have a strong belief in the independent living philosophy. I think it's a quite right way of thinking, and it's important to, you know, to get to know this philosophy and go this way. So it's, you need to people need to believe in themselves, and as I said, all people have the same value. There is no one above another. So and everyone should have the right to their human rights.
Thank you very much, Vibeke. That's a great way to finish this interview. Thank you again for taking
Thank
part.
you.